changed by a supernatural power. So lift up your voice if God's called you to. While we're still here, we've got work to do.
Book called Moses and the Prophets, and it kind of relates a little bit to what Lee was talking about yesterday. Maddie, this is a little unfair, but do you remember off the top of your head, is she still in here? Is Maddie in here? Oh, there you are. My eyes aren't adjusting. Can you remember what Jonathan Kahn said the word Hebrew means? Did he say it related to the crossing? Anyway, I wish I could remember that off the top of my head. I'll try to find it. But I remember, I think he said something, whatever it was, it related in my head to my book, where I have a whole section on how I tell you that when it brings up the land of Canaan, it keeps saying they entered into the land of Canaan. So it brings it up like 35 times. And so I thought that was really significant that he sees the name focusing on the crossing of the Red Sea, and crossing of the Jordan, I think. Yeah, see what I mean? Yeah, so he's focusing on the crossing, and I think that's awesome. It really ties in with my book and the third one where I try to break down, the kind of the history of Israel and what's going on. But tonight, all I want to focus on in that storyline is Moses and Joshua and their prayer lives. And so, let me get to the right day. I was looking all over my stuff trying to find that. Let me see if I can put it here. Which one it is? Oh, I see. Okay. First of all, she is this book is written for the Church of the Nazarene back years ago. This is 1941, and it says Christian Service Training Course. So this is like the course of study. And so right away she owns up that, there is the two different views on when did the Exodus take place, and when do you date the people in the book of Genesis and Exodus. And there's the two dates, the 1400s or the 1200s. The 1200s are put forward by the liberals in the late 1800s, and that's not accurate. And then Olive Winchester says that she is with the conservative view, and I like that. You can't get a professor today, it seems like, to own up. Even at our, I was told by Dennis Kinlaw to go to Wesley Biblical Seminary, and when I was there, I was there for two different generations of professors. The first one was older, and he taught me that there's the documentary hypothesis for the origin of the Pentateuch, which is that, all these guys over time, that's the key thing. It's not literally a Moses, and it's not literally the Bible, and it's not a divine book. It's just made up by human beings over time, like they do with the New Testament. I don't know if you've seen current so-called Christian books. You got to be careful in the stores, but I see some almost every week where they say what the church did with Christ. The titles of the books show that they think over time we blew Christ into God. He wasn't God in the first place, And if you go, they did the same thing with the Old Testament. They want to make it sound like there was no Moses, there was no Egypt, there was, as far as all these things. And you go across the whole history and they just try to wipe it out. And they basically are saying this is just a man-made creation book over time. That's the whole idea of the hypothesis, documentary hypothesis. And they do the same thing with the New Testament. What words are actually Jesus's words? And they can go along with anything that sounds like a moral teaching, maybe. But obviously, all the miraculous stuff is demythologized out of the Scripture. And so she's saying straight up as a professor, I'm not with the bad guys. She says, I'm with the 1400s date, which is good. So she says, we belong to the conservative school. When they say we in the old school, that's her way of saying I. We belong to the conservative school and are satisfied that the evidence establishes this view. And I agree with that. But to move on from there, I wanted to share with you that I think Moses had a very strong connection with God, his prayer life. And so I was reading all of Exodus and all of Leviticus over the last 2 days. And when I was going through them, I've never been so excited to read the logistics of how to keep from getting diseases in the Old Testament, and what food we should eat, and the private lives of the married couples in the Old Testament. And see what I mean? These are the things that it deals with. And usually when you go into that section, I'm just like, or I'm burn reading, as fast as can be, But this time I was really trying to see the value of it and the order of it and understand it and have it impact me. And but the thing that stuck out the most in the whole storyline, was Moses' prayer life. He had a connection with God. So, he goes up on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, and he had already been up there for a period of time. And, he goes into this deep prayer and fasting, and he's going without to the point of impossibility. It has to be a God thing. And while he's up there, Israel goes corrupt, and so does Aaron. And they say, make us a god. And so he says, pull all your, have your women pull all your jewelry off. These are one of the reasons why holiness people always retaliate against a lot of jewelry and all that kind of thing. Hey, I said the word right. That's been a struggle word all my life. Anyway, and so he says, throw it all in the fire, and he tries to, make this perfect thing for them. And then he gets disrespectful to God totally, and he says, Aaron does the next day, he says, here's your gods who took, who got you out of Egypt. And so they start to worship this God, and they go crazy. They're having a big party down there. That's why the old Charlton Heston movie has them dancing around and acting crazy. Because it does, when Moses comes down to the foot of the mountain, he says, it's not the sound of fighting, which is what Joshua was guessing. He says, it's the sound of merriment or partying that I hear down there. And so he goes down, but instantly God already knows, because God tells on him. Moses is up there in this holy cloud, and he's dealing with this awesome experience, and God says, your people who you brought out of Egypt. All of a sudden he disowns them. So he instantly, you can see the separation. So this nonsense about Calvinism, that somehow God's always in relationship to you, or process theology today, whatever you want to look at it, that you're always in relationship to God, you can see that's instantly blown. Because God instantly disowns these people. And then right after that, if you watch, John Oswalt points out that he moves the tent of meeting outside the camp. It describes, it's a cool thing. He says, this is where Moses met with God, but it says outside the camp, and that wasn't the intent. The whole, and by the way, Lee, they actually use the phrase kingdom of priests in the book Exodus, which I think he knew and remembers, but, I was saying it was a hint. I mean, you talk about a hint, it says it, but anyway, we won't go there right now, but you can see from that whole concept, God wanted them to be his and to be in connection with him like that. And because of their sin, he couldn't. So Moses goes down and he, breaks the commandments on purpose. Like throws them out at him. I don't know if he hit it over the head of Aaron and a couple others, but, he broke them to pieces. And I think that is symbolic. I think that was intentional, to say that's what you guys just did. And so he grinds it into powder, and they have to drink the bitter water, and on it goes, the calf idol. But that's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that God's mad. One of the worst things, at first when I first heard, who's the woman preacher that's on TV for all these years recently? She has a lot of books out. Joyce, yeah. Yeah, when I first heard her, I thought she was kind of cool. She'd get up there and sound a little authoritative like Mom, and I thought she was kind of, neat and stuff. But over time, I think all that makeup and money got to her head. I don't know what it is, but over time, she just kind of wimped out and started getting really, really fuzzy and like goofy as a Christian. So she has a book entitled God's Not Angry at Me, you know what I mean? And it's like, yeah, he is, you know what I'm saying? I mean, Wesley said if God's not angry, he was talking about himself as a Christian in relationship to God. And he was saying that, even if you're carnal, God has anger with any amount of sin. Today I spent some time listening to two of Mom's messages. One was the end of a West Texas sermon that she did in, I think it was that 2001? And this one, the other one was back a ways. It went back to my sanctification testimony. She was literally, that's what's so cool. It's the closest thing I found live to that. She was in Tologa, Oklahoma, and she was supposed to be there in December of 1995. Remember, I got sanctified in 1996, January. All right, so somehow she did so good the second time she was there, because she had been there years before that they asked her back within 6 weeks. And so she was back there again, and Mom found the tape of it January 30th of 96, and I checked it all out with everything I got going, and it checks out, So she's there 17 days after I was sanctified. And she doesn't even mention me. It's funny. She goes through the whole thing and says, we just had a big blowout at the evangelist gathering, and pastors were packing the altar, and we stayed there till 2:30 in the afternoon, and on it goes. But she didn't even say a word about me, so you could tell that I had been sanctified a bunch of times. She didn't know if I was, if this was real or not yet. She knew that day, but I'm not sure she knew how much this was going to stick and how real it was. It was too early. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, the prayer warrior retreat. Yeah, I said evangelist again. I'm sorry. Prayer warrior retreat. Yeah. So waiting school used to be called prayer warrior retreats. That's what it was when I got sanctified. And so I love this, man. And I was hearing her. So that day she writes a sermon because she says, for this summer upcoming is the camp meeting. If you remember, that's the one where I got shampooed and blah, 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 blah. Okay. But this is a big, it was right after God healed me. And so anyway. So she was going to go to that camp, and that was where 1,000 people came to the altar when she preached on hell. But while she was there, they had invited her prior to that. They said there's going to be 2,000 to 3,000 people a night. And they said, you're also going to have to come and preach in the area for 7 weeks. And so, man, she added all that up with all the separate services. I don't know if this came true or not, but she said there's like 129 new sermons I need in the next few weeks. So she wrote one that particular night, and I didn't recognize it. It was on Mark 8:34, and but Mom's hitting at home about holiness. So you could tell it wasn't an accident I got sanctified. She was going at him. She was saying, the whole sermon idea was basically you need to deny yourself. And that doesn't mean stop a couple days of doing whatever you do selfishly. That's what she was saying. And she's going after the crowd like that. They were not an easy crowd. I was there once too. They were, bullheaded and kind of stubborn, but their pastor was neat. He was more country than anybody else I knew. And he was actually a good theologian. And he reminds me of Lee. He had the same, thing. He'd say "ol" and on it goes. But he was fired up. He called himself a pastor, but he was actually evangelist and pastor. They let him leave that church and he'd go out and preach. And but Mom was blasting him that night. I heard the ending, because Dad wrote the wrong side of the tape as the side one. So I started at the end, and I'm hearing all that, And so she's giving the altar call and all this, and she did just as I am, and my Jesus, I love thee, and pass me not, And she's hammering them, She's like, I like this, And people were responding during the second sermon, the altar call, and they're coming at times, and she goes, hallelujah, You could just tell when they're breaking, the teens aren't listening at first, and she's blasting them, and on it goes. But again, that her prayer life, and the fact that she was killing holiness everywhere she went. She said, this is the dividing factor. She said, every church I go in, doesn't matter what denomination I preach in. She was saying that this is only 4 or 5 years into her full-blown evangelistic ministry. And she's saying, it's a dividing message every single time. And so you'll see how those things tie together. So when Moses comes down the foot of the mountain, he gets the second bad report from Joshua. And then he goes and he faces up with Israel. But he also wrestles with God, because of this. And so I wanted to point that out to you. It says he argued that God's threat, just think about how quick Moses was to argue. You don't get a mind like that without being in God's presence all the time. Listen how astute, how much better he was. God has made up his mind. I'm going to wipe these people out. Separate from them. And by the way, catch that part, because today a lot of stupid goes on because people don't separate from them. When God says separate from them, I mean, I can't tell you how many times that common sense lesson gets overlooked by somebody who was sanctified and they're no longer sanctified because they don't separate from them. That's the whole idea. You got to, if they're doing wrong. But he argued to God's threat to destroy the calf idol apostatizing Israelites, that the Egyptians would say with evil intent God had brought Israel out to kill them in the wilderness. Who thinks like that? Moses was able to say that to him. You brought them out here to die. And that's what the Egyptian people you just destroyed, that's what the rest of them are going to say. And they're going to spread that message around that you're evil. See what I mean? How did he get such a mindset to contend with God? He reminds me of Abraham. Do you remember the Abraham story where he comes out? I mean, God comes and gives him good news. You're going to have a son. But right at the end of that message, he says, by the way, I'm going to kill Sodom and Gomorrah. You know what I mean? He gets both the good and the bad news, and Abraham busts out in the same type of mentality that Moses has. He just starts saying, hold on a minute. What if there's so-and-so righteous? What if there's so-and-so righteous? And he keeps saying, now that I've been so bold as to speak to God. You get the idea. I mean, these guys, when you call somebody an intercessor, guys, it's so much more than we just pray more than everybody else. Do you see what I'm saying? It's you're going between an angry God and the nation, that is going to be wiped out, and so he does that. He goes before God and he starts arguing with him. And he also showed another time, he argued, secondly, if God was going to destroy persistently wicked Israel because they don't catch on, then he said, blot me out of the book of life. And I like God's answer to him. No, I'm going to blot out those who sin against me. Again, that's a clear answer to Calvinism. Those who sin against me will I blot out of my book. But, still the very fact he did that, God said, I'm still going to get them later. You see what I mean? So you can tell in that text that God put it off for a minute because of Moses' quick thinking. And then the last one, and there's many more places, but I like this place a lot. Chris referenced it on Sunday. It's Exodus 33 and a little bit before that. So while remember, they go down. He comes off the holy mountain. And guys, that's what just happened to Pastor Chris. He just went from being in the glory of God, and he comes back and bleh. Somebody doesn't come from that. And bleh, and it's being demonstrated every minute of every day from that point on, okay? He had to try to use windshield wipers with mud, you know what I'm saying, to get that unbelief off him and all that. I mean, because the minute the two situation comes together, bleh, right at him. Do you see what I mean? And honestly, Pastor Chris has been like shaming me and about everybody I can think of. His heroic acts, his presence, his selflessness. He's been doing a lot of crazy stuff. Going to stores endlessly, hour upon hour upon hour. Deborah's pantry was Pastor Chris. Do you know what I mean? And Russ. Russ was doing it too. I was talking about how crazy. When I was praying before God about Russ, I was like, man, that's a chain to sit there and embarrass yourself or whatever. I mean, I can't even do it like once or twice, let alone, and he's going through the line. I was wondering if he was putting on a new, disguise every time he went through. But anyway, but Pastor Chris was doing it too, and it hurts. And it's hard for a big guy to get around like that and do that day in and day out. And he was unloading it, loading it at the house, unloading it, loading turkeys, He didn't want me to go once, but he was so sick that day, or choking, I can't remember which one it was, he couldn't do it. And so he comes down off glory, blah, and he decides, I'm not going to let that shake me from what I've just experienced. And that's exactly what Moses did. Moses, show me your glory prayer, which is where he got sanctified, came right after the calf idol incident. He says to God a bunch of cool stuff. He says, teach me your ways so that I can continue. This is the whole idea of what we're doing here. Continue to find favor with you. You see what I'm saying? And he basically says, and so I can add it up and help everybody else. But he says on top of that, he says, Lord, I want you to go with us. And God says he will. God starts responding to Moses' character, and he says, I'm going to go up with you. Do you see what I'm saying? And Moses says, if you don't go up with us, then don't send us, because you're it's like Mom says, and I could find her saying it years and years ago. You know what I mean? She says, your presence is the essence of my life. And so she was saying that. He was saying that. He was saying, I don't want to go anywhere. How stupid it would be. What else will distinguish us? What else makes this worthwhile? There's nothing else. See, even though Moses, this thought came to me when I was studying it, Moses never got to go into the promised land, but he got to see God's glory. Do you see what I'm saying? I don't know which one's better. I think I'd rather see his glory than just go over. I have never been to Israel, but I sure have seen his glory. Do you see what I'm saying? There's a difference, and I like that. So if you want some of those passages, this is Exodus chapter 33, 12 to 23, and other places. But let me go on to Joshua, because Joshua's cool too. Joshua caught on from Moses' powerful prayer life that he had to do it as well. He had seen Moses with Hur and Aaron. What a weird name, Hur. Yeah. Hey, dude, that dude's name's Hur. Anyway, but Hur holds up and Aaron hold up Moses' hands, and that's a pretty cool prayer picture too. They're trying to fight, and Israel loses whenever Moses' hands fall down, and so they have to hold his arms up all the way through the night, which is crazy, so that the victory could actually happen, And when he gets done, Moses puts an altar together, and it says, the Lord is my banner. And I think that's cool too. So Joshua was being trained. Do you see what I'm saying? He saw that real victory. See, Joshua's whole life was going to be campaigns of war. And the real war has to be won on our knees. Do you see what I'm saying? We are here, but this is just almost like a figment of our imagination. You know what I mean? What we see in here and now is not reality. There's a deeper reality behind all this. It's the spiritual reality, and that's what we need to be living for. Joshua also waited behind Moses after he left. So Moses would meet with God alone. I think Moses' special presence would bring God. Do you see what I'm saying? In a special way in the meeting room, and then Joshua would stay behind. That's what's so cool. It says Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. So just because Moses left, Joshua wanted some extra credit. You see what I mean? He was like, man, this is awesome. I want to stay right here. Not only that, but if you caught on in Numbers 11, Joshua he was the first one to catch on that the Spirit of God was resting. I mean, they all saw that Moses' face was shining, but Joshua knew why. He said, these guys are in the tent in the camp and they're prophesying. He said, I wanted to go stop them. He was all behind Moses' cause, almost to a fault. And Moses said, would it be better that God would take the spirit that's on me, and make all men prophets? And he did. He took the Spirit of God had been taken from just Moses mainly, and it was put on many of the Israelite leaders. So Joshua was jealous for the presence of God on Moses, and he wanted to stand for that. And that's in chapters 7 and 8. But Joshua had to show his own prayer life. You see what I mean? And it kind of starts off the story with him blowing it. I mean, for all the bragging I'm trying to do about his prayer life, he blows it, right? He and the leaders of Israel don't pray, it says in the context, and Gibeah shows up, nearby people, and they pretend. They have old biscuits with them and stuff, and they're pretending that they're from a long ways away. And all Joshua and the guys do, see, that's what Mom says all the time. If you don't pray, you're going to lean to your own understanding. That's exactly what they did. They look at the evidence, and it seems like these guys are from far away, and so they say, okay, we'll make a treaty with you. That's exactly what God said not to do. And in the Old Testament, if you remember, the whole of the law was given for those who made mistakes. So if you sinned or you broke one of God's commandments on accident, you still were guilty. You see what I mean? And you had to go through the whole sacrificial experience and everything to clean you up for what just happened. And so Joshua had to learn the hard way. He blew it. You know what I'm saying? That one particular time, it was like a kind of a miss picture of his usual prayerful spirit. But later on, we see him start to pray. You remember when they deal with the situation of I always called it I. Everybody else is like AI, whatever you want to say it. That's how you spell it. I don't know why you say it like you spell it, but I say I, okay? I, sir, whatever you want to say. And so there's this little city, and Israel should have whooped them. But because Achan was Achan for a bacon, he took, from Jericho, what God said don't touch. If you touch any devoted things, I will, this is a good sermon on sin right there. I've used it before. If you touch the devoted things, the things that God says are his or off, you're not supposed to use at all. If you touch them, the judgment for those devoted things that are devoted to destruction will come on you. And that's exactly what happened to Achan. So he's hiding amongst the tribes. And that's kind of a hard thing to figure out. And it even said, Olive Winchester made it sound like it was some army situation where they're standing there and they're kind of going through ranks and trying to figure it out. I don't think it was that. I don't think he was using the regular means or anything. I think Joshua and his prayer life, God told him what to do. If you just read the text, it says, take this tribe and take this group and blah, blah, blah. And he singles them out until Achan is standing right there before him. He says, confess what you've done. And Achan says, yeah, I stole these things, the talent and the robe, and buried them in my tent. And so he says, okay, you're in trouble. You can tell it was one of those confessions that it's one of those death penalty confessions that people often make. Okay, I'm a bad guy just because now I'm finally caught. And so he gets burned, he gets stoned, but as a result, you can see that Joshua had such a powerful prayer life there. I think it's even more evident, though, when Joshua was praying that God would help him defeat as he starts the campaigns. The south was easy. When they enter into Canaan land, it was supposed to be a quick. Remember that? I did a whole teaching, my whole book's on was it quick or was it supposed to be long? Do you know it took 400 years for him to finally take over Canaan? You know why? Just like America today, when I say the only president, the current communist leader, whatever you guys want to call that guy, the guy before him, when he was telling us as states, the different states, to obey what he was laying down as a rule, he was having trouble with it, wasn't he? Right here in Michigan, the land, we're starting to sound like the land of the fruits and the nuts. Pure moron. Remember the signs that said that and why they said that? There's a bunch of dummies here that were ignoring the leadership that as he was listening to God, right? And they're doing everything to undo whatever he was doing, okay? And same thing now with the Supreme Court. We had the great victory of, that Jonathan Cahn's praising God for, which was the abortion, being stopped as a Supreme Court ruling. But then what did the states decide to do? Do you see what I'm saying? And guys, you could see the same thing going on in this scriptural text. Joshua was able to break the southern campaign quick. He was able. God would trigger things through all the motion. When they made that little compact with Gibeah, Gibeah is crying out a little bit later because the whole group shows up, and then he comes over, busts them all in the chops, and wins. You see what I'm saying? I mean, it just everything worked quick. But when it came to the north, they couldn't get him out of there. And Josh was an old geezer at the end of Judges saying, guys, why aren't you doing what you should have been doing? And it was left up to the states, to the tribes, to eradicate the problem. He had broke the whole system. I mean, they win the northern campaign too. He was already leading half of Canaan. Think about it today in terms of how they tried to take Canaan. In the recent years, 1948, 1966, you remember how long it took and how hard it was and all these battles back and forth, over the whole Canaan land? Well, you can see that kind of thing. I mean, it's strange. Joshua was one who set that tone and set that standard for the land. And so, Joshua sits there and he's praying and he's saying, God, help us, because this big army shows up. Well, God ends up blasting him. You get a prelude to later situation where hail balls start coming down and knocking guys out because God's like tired of it. God, I mean, guys, that's pretty cool. When you think about all this evil, this loose evil right now in the world, what they're trying to do to Israel and stuff, and God's saying, I can drop stuff when I want to drop stuff, on their head. But more than that, Joshua's prayer life ends up being, I think as a result of Moses' prayer life, he ends up being the one who stops the sun and the moon. That's insane. However long it would take in order to win that battle. They weren't going to win. You could tell sometimes these battles were crazy hard. You know what I mean? And they weren't over, notice the time involved in these prayer battles. They had to hold their arms of Moses up all night. He couldn't hold his own arms up. It's impossible. After just 15, 20 minutes, it's impossible. I know I've done old people workouts that are even that. And even when I was in my 20s, I couldn't put my arms up after 25 minutes. It's crazy, okay? And, here you have to have somebody holding your arms all through the night. Well, they were going to lose if the lights went out. You see, they weren't going to know what was going on. They were going to scatter. They were going to resettle, and it'd be a big mess. And so God said, hey, I want you to pray, Joshua, something crazy. And he does. I want you to hear his words. He says, "O sun, stand still over Gibeon. O moon, over the valley of Ajalon." And God does that. He pauses. I'd love to hear these dum-dums today that are so evolutionary focused, who are measuring the stars and the movements. I'd love to see them try to X that out because it happened in time. You see what I mean? And it'd be crazy to go through that. But anyway, so, Mom's always talking about our prayer lives, changing outcomes of world wars, crazy things that are too big for us. You know what I mean? And we're benefiting off the fruit of her prayer life. All these years she's been preaching this. All these years she's been practicing it. You get what I mean? And, we too can see something change at a level like that. That's insane, all right? So another story is when the northern campaign of Canaan came against Joshua, he had a bigger problem than he had ever had before. But God encouraged him. He said, the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them, because by this time tomorrow I will hand all of them over to Israel slain. You are to hamstring their horses and burn their chariots." See, Joshua is now equal to the job. Do you see what I mean? He became just like Moses. And so again, how long did it take him to win that campaign? 7 years. That's not very long. How long did it take for the states to obey and do what they're supposed to do? 400 years. Do you see what I'm saying? They didn't listen. And God ends up leaving them with a permanent the school hard knocks. You know what I mean? You won't listen to me, so I'm going to leave these guys here. I told you not to leave them. They're going to be barbs in your sides, thorns in your sides. I'm going to leave them here, and they're going to teach you guys how to fight, and then they're going to be problems to you for the rest. You get what I'm saying? I mean, it's insane, and that's what they chose. And so I'm just calling out victory tonight. You see what I mean? I'm just saying, guys, this is ours. God has shown us at young ages such a powerful, impacting prayer life. That's why we're here. Why? Because we can see, souls change left and right, not one by one. You know what I mean? Something that is unheard of today. We can see it again, and I want to get back to that. I'll dig the whole Bible out before I give up. You see what I mean? I want to know how to be that impacting. Let's pray. Father, tonight, I thank you for Moses. I thank you that he saw life like it is in the face of everything that everybody else says it's about. Lord, I thank you that he never lost his glow with you. He never lost his passion. He wanted to be the leader that you called him to be, and Lord, he drove after you hard. And it's interesting to me that the spiritual ones that get closest to you never forget. Charles Wesley kind of went off the road, but John Wesley stayed. And Lord, he was so close to you. He heard your voice. He stayed in touch with you. He became the menace to the devil all by himself. There's a point where he even had to leave Charles out of it. He said, "Could God use one man?" And that's a clear sentence of, I don't have him anymore. He even said it to his brother at one point. He said, "You left me crawling and doing it all by myself." But Lord, the truth is those that stuck closest to that fire, they end up being the people who you use the most. And Lord, it's our passion to finally break through. It's our passion to get out of the mold and stop seeing the setbacks, and to be individuals who have your heart and can see big things change. Lord, I pray that we get to that spot. And I pray Pastor Chris, what he did this week, where he shook it off and he just went right back to your glory. He just decided, I still want that. Remember his message Sunday before he left. Guys, this is God we're speaking about. That's basically what he said in short. This is God we're speaking about. And there's so much. He doesn't, it's not just when Jesus is in the boat, we can smile in a storm. He was saying, let Jesus be in charge of the boat. Let Jesus, do what he can do and get out of the way, And Lord, unless we die to ourselves, like Mom was saying when she was preaching holiness like that, day in and day out, preaching it at me, Lord, you can tell it was hot. She was hot off the press. I was hot off the press. You had just done that work in my life. And Lord, she was blasting all over the land, And Lord, that's why the enemy hates it so much, because this is the winning message. This is what brings people victory. It's what keeps people from falling back. One of the key points that she made and Phineas Brzee made today was he said, you got to get this baptism of the Holy Spirit. He said, if you do, it'll keep you from backsliding. Lord, that's the whole point. That's why the devil hates it. And Lord, I just pray we would keep that message in front of people day and night. I pray it be our passion, and our lives would show it, Lord. And I pray above that we would keep this prayer life going, Lord, so we can continue in your favor. I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.